everyone, and welcome to week 5 of this summer's course on C#. This week we will be talking about arrays, as well as try-catch, which is a way to handle errors, and implicitly typed variables, and a couple other little tips and tricks that you'll find useful. But in this lesson we're going to talk about arrays. So what are arrays? Arrays are a group of variables of the same type. I've used in many examples the days of the week, Sunday through Saturday, and assigned them integer values 0 through 6, representing each day, Sunday being 0 and Saturday being 6. You can think of this as an array, where the integer value of the day, 0 through 6, is called an index, and the value, the strings, the names for each day can be called the value. If we were to write variables representing each day of the week, we would have to write them individually. So here, we would declare a variable string day 0 equals Sunday, string day 1 equals Monday, and so on and so forth until we got to string day 6 equals Saturday. This isn't very useful because if you tried to loop through each day of the week, in what we've learned so far, you can't implicitly access each of these variables by switching on the index. So if we wanted to display each day of the week, we would have to do 7 console.writeLines. Day 0, day 1, and so forth. It gets to be a little tedious. And this applies to any list of things. We can talk about days of the week. We can talk about students in a class. We can talk about each temperature across a week or a year. Each of these things represents a list. And that list, instead of declaring individual variables for each value we want to save, we can instead use an array. So again, I said that an array is a group of variables of the same type. An array is broken down into 2 parts. There is an index, which is the representative of the item in the list, and then there is a value, and a value is the value for that index or item in the list. Let's open up Excel real quick, and let's talk about days of the week. If we want to store elements in an array, we can think of them like a grid structure. So here, days of the week, index 0 would be Sunday, 1 would be Monday, 2 would be Tuesday, and so on and so forth. So if we look at this array in pseudocode, essentially, you have 7 elements. Each element has 2 parts, an index and a correlating value. So the index 0 points to Sunday, 1 points to Monday, 2 to Tuesday, and so on and so forth, until 6 points to Saturday. Now there's a couple caveats that you need to remember before we talk about how we implement an array in code. The length or count of an array, and you'll see both of those used interchangeably, is the total number of elements in the array. So in this case, there's 7 days in the week, so there are 7 elements. But the indices start at 0. So any index must be a non-negative integer. You cannot have an array index of -1. It must always start at 0. But again, we see the highest index value here is equal to 6. So remember, the length of your array, in this case, is 7, but your highest value is length minus 1. Again, you could use the word count. The count of the array is 7, but your maximum index value is your count minus 1. So if you're ever wondering what your first index is, it's always 0. And if you're ever wondering what your last index is, it's always the count or length minus 1. So please keep that in mind as you build loops and access members of arrays. When you access an individual member of an array, remember, since we talked about the indexes start at 1, if you want to access the first member of the array, you access it by 0. The second member, 1. So when you're thinking in your head, you want the first item, subtract 1 from that. If you want the second item, subtract 1 from that. And the index will always be 1 less than the item in your mind of a numbered list. So for instance, in Excel, it starts at 1. Here, in an index of an array, you want to subtract 1 and start at 0. So our starting point is always 0. So let's talk about putting this into code. There's some new syntax you're going to learn, and please be very careful. Arrays are much different than our normal variable declaration. They're still variables. Remember, we're declaring a variable that is an array. It is a container of other variables. We won't get into the nitty-gritty of how it is accessed in memory, but essentially we talked about the ref parameter. These are implicit references. You won't need to use ref in order to define it, but you can think of it as a reference. So let's say we want to declare an array of a day of each day of the week. You have to look at what type each element is. And remember, in an array, all variables must be of the same type. So in essence here, our type will be string. And in order to declare an array of strings, you first declare the type. And this could be int, this could be double, it could be any type. And you do an open and close square bracket. That indicates we are having an array of a type. In here, it's an array of type string. Next, you declare your variable name, days of week. And then we will initialize this variable, just like we did when declaring other variables, with an equal sign. Next, it's very important, you must use the keyword new. N-E-W. That indicates that we are initializing a new array of type string. And here, we will type in string, an open square bracket. Inside of this, put the total count of the array. This is not a representation of an index of the array, which we'll talk about in a second, but it is the total count. So for days of the week, we want 7 members, 7 elements. We will type in 7. And we will hit a close bracket and a semicolon. So what we've done here is we've told the compiler we would like to have a new array of strings called days of week, and we are initializing in memory 7 blank strings that are now attached to this array. So now we've defined the array. There is another way to define an array. Instead of putting the initializer on the same line, just like when declaring other variables, we can put a semicolon and then assign it later. Here we've defined days of week as a string, array of strings, and we can then assign it to a new initializer here later on. We don't have to do it right away. Both of these are acceptable, but you typically want to define your array right off the bat. Now that we've defined the array, let's put some things in it. Whether you're getting a value from a specific element in an array or writing a value to that specific element in the array, there's a specific syntax you need to use. So here we need to write the days of the week to this array. We will do that first by typing the variable name, days of week, an open square bracket, and then the index that you want to access. Here we want to access the first item, so that's index 0, close bracket, and we want to write the word Sunday to it. All right. Now we want to duplicate this for each day of the week and write the name into the variable. All right, so what we've done here is for each index 0 through 6, we have written the corresponding string. If we go back to our table in Excel, we've done the exact same work here. We've declared for index 0, the string value is Sunday. For 1, it's Monday. 2, Tuesday. 3, Wednesday. 4, Thursday. 5, Friday. And 6, Saturday. Now, if you want to read from a specific element in the array, you can apply the same logic. Let's write to the console the first day of the week. So what we've done here is we've typed in the name of the array, days of week, an open square bracket, the index we want to read, and a closed square bracket. And that will read the 0th item of the array. In this case, it will display Sunday on the screen. Let's run this application. And we see we've written Sunday here to the screen. That correlates to the 0th item in the array. Now we can write all of these items in the same way. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If I could type, it would help. And we could run this again and we'll see every day of the week printed. And again, these correlate to each of the indices of the array. And another way we can access all these is a for loop. So you noticed we put a constant value here, 0 through 6. Instead, we can write a quick for loop. So we'll go from 0 to 6, counter equals 0, counter is less than 7, and increment counter by 1. And we can replace the constant value we put into the array accessor here with the variable counter. So now we will show every day of the week, and we only had to write 2 lines instead of 7. So let's run this again. And we see we've shown every day of the week, counter from 0 to 7, and we've accessed that element of the array using counter. There are many more ways to initialize arrays. We'll go over those in the next lesson. You don't have to always define each of these lines using 7 or more lines. You can set values later, and we'll talk about that in our next lesson.